Erin's heart raced as she dragged the alien's limp form through the underbrush. They were lighter than she expected, their silvery skin cool to the touch. The occasional flicker of light beneath their translucent surface startled her, like tiny pulses of starlight coursing through their veins. "Come on," she muttered, her voice trembling as she struggled to pull them up the narrow path to her cabin. Her mind buzzed with questions. Who are they? What are they? Once inside, she laid them gently on the couch, grabbing a blanket to cover their strange, shimmering body. The alien stirred slightly, their eyes fluttering open for a moment. "Rest," Erin whispered, brushing her dark curls away from her face as she knelt beside them. She had no idea what she was dealing with, but leaving them outside to fend for themselves felt unthinkable. Erin checked their breathing, it was shallow but steady, and dashed to her kitchen. She grabbed a bowl of water and a clean cloth, returning to dab gently at their forehead. The moment the cool cloth touched their skin, a faint ripple of energy spread across their body, making Erin flinch. The alien groaned, their voice melodic and otherworldly, though their words were still unintelligible. They turned their head, violet eyes locking onto hers, their gaze filled with something that looked like desperation. "Hold on," she murmured. "You'll be okay. I'll help you." The alien's lips moved, their voice barely audible. "Burning inside, why?" Erin frowned, her chest tightening with worry. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I'll figure it out." As the hours passed, Erin scoured her books and journals for anything that might help her understand what was happening. She was a botanist, not a doctor or a scientist who studied extraterrestrial life, but she knew the forest and its resources like the back of her hand. If there was a way to help this being, she would find it. The alien began to stir again, their movements weak but deliberate. Erin watched as they tried to sit up, only to collapse back onto the couch. "Don't," she said gently, placing a hand on their shoulder. "You're too weak." The alien glanced at her hand, then back at her, their expression softening. "Human," they whispered, their voice clearer now but still strained. "Why help me?" Erin hesitated, unsure of how to explain something so instinctive. "Because you needed me," she said simply. "And because I couldn't just walk away." The alien studied her for a long moment, their gaze piercing yet curious. Finally they nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of their lips. "Thy Rick," they said, tapping their chest weakly. Erin blinked. "Thy Rick." They nodded again, their smile growing a little wider despite the obvious pain they were in. "Okay, Thy Rick," she said, her voice steady but kind. "I'm Erin. And I'm going to help you, no matter what." A soft glow pulsed beneath Thyric's skin at her words, their bodies seeming to relax for the first time since she found them. Erin wasn't sure what she'd gotten herself into, but as she looked at Thyric's fragile form, a strange warmth blossomed in her chest, a mix of compassion, curiosity, and something she couldn't quite name. Little did she know, that night was only the beginning of a journey that would change both their lives forever. Erin knelt in the dirt, carefully placing a small fern into her sample bag. The cool evening breeze brushed against her cheeks, carrying with it the scent of pine and damp earth. Nights like this, with the forest quiet except for the occasional chirp of crickets, were her favorite. But tonight, something felt different. The air was heavy, charged with an energy she couldn't explain. She stood, scanning the treetops. That's when it happened. A brilliant flash tore across the sky, bathing the forest in a bright, otherworldly glow. A roaring sound followed, like the cry of some enormous beast, as a streak of light arced downward and crashed into the woods. The ground trembled beneath her feet, and for a moment, the world stood still. Erin's heart pounded. She froze, clutching her sample bag tightly. Every instinct screamed at her to run back to the safety of her cabin, but something tugged at her, curiosity or maybe something deeper. Against her better judgment, she made her way toward the crash site. The forest, so familiar to her, now felt alien. Shadows danced unnaturally in the glow of the distant firelight. The closer she got, the more her senses rebelled. The air buzzed, not with sound but with a vibration she could feel in her bones. Finally, she broke through the tree line and saw it. The object lay half buried in the ground, its smooth, black surface glinting like obsidian. Tendrils of steam rose from its edges, and the air around it shimmered like heat waves. It wasn't a meteor, that much was clear. Before Erin could process what she was looking at, the object hissed. A panel slid open, and a figure tumbled out, collapsing onto the forest floor. Her breath caught. The figure was humanoid, but everything about them screamed not human. Their skin shimmered faintly, like silver caught in moonlight, and their hair, if it could be called that, flowed like liquid starlight down their back. Most striking of all were their eyes, glowing a vivid violet that seemed to pierce straight through her. The figure groaned, their body convulsing as faint ripples of light moved beneath their skin. Erin stepped forward cautiously, her fear warring with a deep, inexplicable need to help. "Are you alive?" she asked, her voice trembling. The figure looked up at her, their expression a mixture of pain and confusion. They opened their mouth to speak, but all that came out was a series of melodic, alien sounds. Erin crouched beside them, her instincts taking over. "You're hurt," she said softly, though she doubted they could understand her. "I'll help you. Just hold on." The figure reached out weakly, their hand brushing against hers. A jolt shot through her, not painful but startling, like an electric current. Their lips moved again, this time forming something almost like a word. "Human," they whispered, their voice faint and strained. "Burning inside. Why?" Erin's brow furrowed. She had no idea what was happening to them, but their words sent a chill through her. She hesitated only a moment before making a decision. "I'll take you somewhere safe," she said firmly. She wrapped their arm around her shoulder and began to drag them toward her cabin. The trek back was slow and grueling. The figure's body was surprisingly light, but their skin radiated a strange heat that made her uneasy. By the time she reached the cabin, her muscles ached, and her breath came in gasps. Inside, she laid them gently on the couch, her hands trembling as she grabbed a blanket to cover them. The figure's glow had dimmed, and their breathing was shallow. "Hang on," Erin whispered, grabbing a bowl of water and a cloth. She dabbed at their forehead, startled when their skin rippled under her touch like a pool of liquid light. The figure stirred slightly, their eyes fluttering open. They stared at her, their violet gaze filled with an odd mix of fear, gratitude, and something else she couldn't place. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure's lips moved, and after a moment of effort, they managed a single word. "Thy Rick." Erin blinked, taken aback. "Thy Rick," she repeated. They nodded weakly, their eyes closing again as exhaustion overtook them. Erin sat back, her mind racing. She had no idea what she was dealing with or how to help, but one thing was certain, she couldn't leave them alone. As she watched Thyric's faintly glowing form, she felt a strange, unshakable pull toward them. Whatever had brought them to Earth, she was determined to find out. And as the stars continued to shine outside, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just changed forever. The cabin was silent, save for the faint crackle of the fireplace. Erin sat slumped in a chair beside the couch, her chin resting on her hand as she watched the alien, Thy Rick, rest. Their breathing was steady now, and the strange glow under their silvery skin had dimmed to a soft pulse. Erin hadn't slept. How could she? An alien being was lying on her couch, and nothing in her life had prepared her for this moment. Her thoughts raced. What if someone finds out? What if Thy Rick isn't friendly when they wake up? What if they don't wake up at all? As the first rays of dawn filtered through the cabin's curtains, Thy Rick stirred. Their glowing violet eyes fluttered open, and for a moment they stared at the ceiling, disoriented. "Hey," Erin said softly, leaning forward. "You're awake." Thy Rick turned their head toward her, their gaze locking onto hers. For a moment, they looked almost frightened, their body tensing. "It's okay," Erin said, holding her hands up in a gesture of peace. "You're safe here." Thyric's lips moved, forming words that were melodic but unintelligible. They struggled to sit up, their movements slow and unsteady. "Wait," Erin said, rushing to their side. She gently pushed them back onto the couch. "Don't strain yourself. You're still weak." Thy Rick frowned, their glowing eyes scanning her face as though trying to make sense of her words. After a moment, they spoke again, this time haltingly, as if searching for the right sounds. "Erin." She froze. The sound of her name, spoken in Thyric's strange melodic voice, sent a shiver down her spine. "Yes," she said, pointing to herself. "Erin." "That's me." Thy Rick nodded slowly, then placed a hand on their chest. "Thy Rick." Erin smiled faintly. "I know. You told me last night." Thyrick tilted their head, their expression a mixture of curiosity and confusion. They pointed at her, then at themselves, and then gestured to the room around them. "Where am I?" "You're on Earth," Aaron explained, speaking slowly. She gestured toward the window. "This is my home. My cabin." Thyrick frowned, their violet eyes narrowing as they processed her words. They spoke again, their voice strained but clearer. "Earth, atmosphere, burns." They pressed a hand to their chest, their glow intensifying slightly. "Burns," Aaron repeated, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" Thyrick struggled to find the words, their frustration evident. "Inside," they said finally, their voice cracking. "I am not meant to be here." A cold weight settled in Aaron's stomach. Thyrick was in pain, and she had no idea how to help. "Okay," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Let's figure this out together." She grabbed her notebook and began scribbling notes, asking Thyrick questions as best she could. Where had they come from? How had they ended up here? What could she do to help? Thyrick answered in fragmented sentences, their limited grasp of her language making communication slow and painstaking. From what Aaron could piece together, Thyrick's body was reacting violently to Earth's atmosphere. The burning sensation was a sign of their body struggling to adapt, and if it continued, it could become fatal. Aaron leaned back in her chair, chewing on the end of her pen as she stared at her notes. "Okay," she murmured to herself. "Think. You're a botanist, not a doctor, but there has to be something you can do." Thyrick watched her intently, their expression unreadable. After a moment, they reached out, their hand brushing against hers. The touch sent a jolt of warmth up her arm, startling her. "Why help?" Thyrick asked, their voice soft. "You don't know me." Aaron hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because you needed me," she said simply. "And because it's the right thing to do." Thyrick stared at her for a long moment, their glowing eyes filled with something Aaron couldn't quite place. Finally they nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of their lips. As the day wore on, Thyrick grew stronger, though their movements were still slow and deliberate. Aaron stayed by their side, guiding them when they faltered and answering their endless stream of questions about Earth. At one point, Thyrick gazed out the window, their eyes widening as they took in the sight of the forest bathed in golden sunlight. "Beautiful," they murmured, their voice filled with wonder. Aaron smiled. "Yeah, it is." Thyrick turned to her, their expression serious. "You, beautiful." Aaron's cheeks flushed, her heart skipping a beat. Thank you," she stammered, caught off guard. Thyrick smiled faintly, their exhaustion evident. "Human, strange," they said, their voice tinged with warmth. "But kind." Aaron chuckled softly, the tension in her chest easing. "You're not so bad yourself." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the cabin in a warm, golden glow, Aaron couldn't help but marvel at the strange turn her life had taken. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but as she looked at Thyrick, this strange, otherworldly being who had crash-landed into her world, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. And, for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't alone. The days that followed felt like a surreal dream to Aaron. She had always lived a quiet life, her days revolving around plants and solitude, but now her cabin bustled with a strange energy. Thyrick was a constant presence, their every movement a blend of grace and curiosity as they adjusted to their new environment. Aaron found herself observing them more than she intended. Thyrick's fascination with Earth's simplest things was infectious. They marveled at the way sunlight filtered through leaves, how water rippled when disturbed, and the gentle rustle of wind through the trees. "Why do you grow these?" Thyrick asked one morning, their voice still halting but improving. They gestured to the potted herbs on the windowsill, their head tilted in that endearing way that signaled curiosity. Aaron smiled, setting down the cup of tea she'd been holding. "I grow them because they're useful and beautiful. They make life better." Thyrick leaned closer to the basil plant, their violet eyes shimmering with intrigue. "Life better, because of plants?" She nodded. "Exactly. They heal, they nourish, and they remind us of how connected everything is." Thyrick considered this for a moment before reaching out to brush their fingers against the leaves. "Beautiful," they said, echoing their earlier sentiment about the forest. Erin's chest tightened unexpectedly at the simple word. Thyric's wonder reminded her of something she had lost, an appreciation for the small miracles of life. But it wasn't just Thyric's curiosity that drew her in. As the days passed, she noticed the way their presence shifted the atmosphere in the cabin. When Thyric smiled, it was like a beacon, warm and unguarded. When they laughed, an odd melodic sound, it was as if the room itself responded, becoming lighter. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Thyric broke the comfortable silence. "Erin," they began, their voice soft, "why do you live here, alone?" She looked at them, surprised by the question. She hesitated before answering, unsure how much to share. "I needed a change," she said finally. "The city, it didn't feel like home anymore. Out here, it's peaceful. I can think, breathe." Thyric studied her, their glowing eyes searching hers. "But lonely." Erin's throat tightened. She opened her mouth to deny it, but the words caught. Thyric's gaze was too honest, too understanding. "Sometimes," she admitted quietly. Thyric nodded, as though they understood completely. "I know lonely," they said. "On my world. I was alone too." Erin's heart ached at the vulnerability in their voice. "Your world," she said softly, leaning forward. "What was it like?" Thyric's eyes dimmed slightly, the glow subdued by a shadow of sadness. "Bright," they said after a long pause. "Everything, alive. Connected. But different. I left. Because I didn't belong." Erin's breath hitched. The weight in their words struck a chord deep within her, resonating with her own feelings of displacement. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Thyric looked at her, their expression unreadable. Then they reached out, their hand brushing against hers. The contact sent a wave of warmth through her, not just physical but something deeper. "No. I am here," they said. "Not alone." Erin felt her cheeks flush, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand over, letting their fingers intertwine. "You're not alone anymore," she said firmly. For a moment, they sat like that, the firelight casting a golden glow over their joined hands. As the days stretched into weeks, Erin and Thyric fell into an easy rhythm. Thyric's strength improved daily, though they still struggled with the occasional burning sensation. Erin worked tirelessly to create remedies from plants and herbs, experimenting with teas and salves that seemed to ease their discomfort. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, Thyric paused, holding up a sprig of thyme. "This for taste?" they asked, their lips quirking in a playful smile. Erin laughed, nodding. "Exactly. It makes the food better." Thyric tilted their head. "Like you," they said simply. She froze, her cheeks warming. "What do you mean?" "You make everything better," Thyric said, their tone earnest. "Food. Life. Me." Erin swallowed hard, her heart pounding. "Thyric." They stepped closer, their glowing eyes locking onto hers. "I feel something," they admitted, their voice a soft melody. "When I see you. When you smile." Erin's breath hitched. The air between them felt charged, like the moments before a summer storm. "I feel it too," she confessed, her voice trembling. Thyric reached up, their fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Human," they murmured, their tone filled with wonder. "You are my light." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Erin's chest ache. Without thinking, she leaned in, her hand resting gently against Thyric's cheek. In that moment, the barriers between their worlds seemed to fade, leaving only the connection between them. And as the fire crackled softly in the background, Erin realized that what had begun as an accident, a crash in the woods, was turning into something extraordinary. Something worth fighting for. The days grew shorter as autumn began to blanket the forest in hues of amber and crimson. Erin and Thyric found themselves spending more time indoors, the chill of the season seeping into the cabin. Despite the dropping temperatures, the warmth between them only seemed to grow. Thyric was healing. The burning sensations that once plagued them had subsided, thanks in part to Erin's endless experimentation with herbs and remedies. Yet, even as their body adjusted, Thyric knew they could not stay on Earth indefinitely. One crisp evening, as the stars glittered in the clear sky, Thyric stood by the window, their silver hair shimmering in the moonlight. Erin sat at the table, scribbling notes in her journal, but her attention kept drifting to Thyrick. "You're quiet tonight," she said softly, setting her pen down. Thyrick turned, their glowing violet eyes meeting hers. "Thinking," they replied, their voice gentle. "About what?" They hesitated, their gaze drifting back to the stars. "My home," they said finally. "And you?" Erin's heart skipped a beat. She stood and walked to their side, looking up at the same sky they were lost in. "What about me?" Thyrick turned to face her fully, their expression solemn. "I came here by accident," they began. "But meeting you, it feels like fate." Erin's breath caught. She had felt it too, that inexplicable pull, the sense that their meeting was meant to be. "I don't believe in fate," she said quietly. "But I do believe in you." Thyrick's lips curved into a faint smile. "You are remarkable, Erin," they said, their voice laced with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "I have seen many stars, many worlds. But none have made me feel alive, like you do." Erin's cheeks flushed, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She reached for their hand, intertwining her fingers with theirs. "You make me feel alive too," she admitted. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, Thyrick broke the stillness. "But I cannot stay," they said, their voice breaking slightly. Erin's heart sank. She had known this moment would come, but hearing the words out loud felt like a knife to her chest. "Why not?" she asked, her voice trembling. Thyrick gestured to their body, the faint glow under their skin pulsing. "This world, it is not mine. My body was not made for this atmosphere. The remedies you have made help, but they are temporary." Tears welled in Erin's eyes, but she blinked them back. "Then I'll find another way," she said fiercely. "I'll keep trying." Thyrick cupped her face gently, their touch warm and comforting. "You have already done so much," they said softly. "More than anyone else would have. But this is not your burden to bear." Erin shook her head, tears spilling over despite her efforts to hold them back. "You're not a burden," she whispered. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." Thyrick's eyes glowed brighter, their emotions clearly mirrored in their expression. "And you are my reason to stay," they said. "If I could." Their words broke something in Erin. She threw her arms around them, holding them tightly as if she could anchor them to her world. Thyrick wrapped their arms around her, their embrace firm yet gentle. "I don't want to lose you," Erin whispered, her voice muffled against their chest. Thyrick rested their chin on her head, their own voice trembling. "And I do not want to leave you. But my body, it will not survive much longer here." Erin pulled back, her eyes searching theirs desperately. "There has to be another way," she said. "Something we're missing." Thyrick hesitated, then nodded. "Perhaps," they said, though their tone was doubtful. "But it would require time." "Then we'll find the time," Erin said, determination hardening her voice. "We'll figure this out together." Thyrick smiled faintly, their hand brushing a tear from her cheek. "Your heart. It is the strongest thing I have ever known." "And it's yours," Erin said, her voice unwavering. For the rest of the evening, they stayed by the fire, holding each other as if the world could fall apart around them and it wouldn't matter. The crackling flames cast shadows on the walls, their warmth a small comfort against the storm of emotions swirling between them. As the night deepened, Thyrick leaned down, their forehead touching hers. "No matter what happens," they murmured, "I will always carry this. Carry you, with me." Erin nodded, her hands clutching theirs tightly. "And I'll never stop fighting for us," she promised. Outside, the stars continued to shine, their light cold and distant. But inside the cabin, a love was burning brighter than any star, a love that defied worlds, bound by something neither of them could fully explain but both felt in the very core of their beings. For now, they had each other. And for Erin, that was enough. The following weeks were a whirlwind of determination and discovery. Erin threw herself into research, scouring her books, experimenting with new combinations of herbs, and testing methods that might stabilize Thyrick's body. Meanwhile, Thyrick helped where they could, their alien understanding of biology offering hints that guided her efforts. But time was running out. The glow beneath Thyrick's skin flickered more frequently now, a sign that their body was struggling to sustain itself. One chilly morning, Erin woke to find Thyrick sitting outside the cabin, their silver hair catching the early sunlight. They were gazing at the horizon, their expression pensive. "You shouldn't be out here," Erin said gently, wrapping a blanket around their shoulders as she sat beside them. Thyrick glanced at her, a soft smile gracing their lips. "I wanted to see the sunrise," they said. "It is beautiful. Like you." Erin's cheeks flushed, but she couldn't bring herself to scold them. Instead, she leaned against their shoulder, drawing strength from their presence. "I think I'm getting closer," she said, her voice filled with quiet hope. "There's a plant I've read about, one that might stabilize your body's energy. I just need to find it." Thyrick turned to her, their glowing eyes searching hers. "Erin," they said softly, "you are trying so hard." "For me?" "Of course I am," she replied, her voice firm. "I told you, I'm not giving up." Thyrick reached for her hand, their touch warm despite the chill in the air. "You are extraordinary," they murmured. The plant Erin spoke of wasn't easy to find. Known as lumenroot, it was said to grow only in high-altitude forests, hidden among the rocks. Undeterred, Erin packed supplies for the journey, insisting that she would go alone despite Thyrick's protests. "You're not strong enough to make the climb," she argued as they stood at the cabin door. "I need you to stay here and rest." Thyrick frowned, their worry evident. "What if something happens to you?" Erin smiled faintly, reaching up to touch their cheek. "I'll come back," she promised. "I always come back." Thyrick sighed, their hand covering hers. "Be careful, Erin." "I will," she said. The journey was grueling. The path was steep and treacherous, the air growing thinner with each step. But Erin pressed on, her resolve fueled by the thought of Thyrick waiting for her. Finally, after hours of searching, she found it, a patch of luminous plants growing in the shadow of a jagged cliff. Their roots glowed faintly, a soft light that seemed almost otherworldly. Erin carefully harvested a few, wrapping them in cloth before beginning the descent. By the time she returned to the cabin, the sun was setting, casting the sky in hues of gold and pink. Thyrick was waiting for her, their worry melting into relief as she stepped through the door. "You're back," they said, their voice filled with emotion. "I told you I'd come back," Erin said with a tired smile. She wasted no time preparing a remedy, grinding the roots into a paste and combining them with other herbs. Thyrick watched her work, their gaze filled with a mixture of awe and gratitude. When the mixture was ready, Erin handed Thyrick a small bowl. "This should help," she said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. Thyrick hesitated, their violet eyes meeting hers. "You've done so much for me," they said softly. "And I'd do it all again," Erin replied. "Now drink." Thyrick obeyed, their expression tense as they swallowed the concoction. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a faint glow spread across their skin, brighter and steadier than before. Erin's breath caught. "It's working," she whispered, her hands trembling. Thyrick closed their eyes, a deep sigh escaping them. When they opened their eyes again, the glow was calm, even, no longer flickering. "I feel better," Thyrick said, their voice filled with wonder. Erin's knees buckled, relief washing over her like a wave. Thyrick caught her before she could fall, holding her close. "You did it," they murmured, their voice thick with emotion. "You saved me." Erin buried her face in their chest, her tears soaking into their shirt. "I couldn't lose you," she whispered. "I wouldn't." Thyrick held her tightly, their warmth enveloping her. "And now I can stay," they said softly, their voice trembling. "With you." Erin pulled back just enough to look up at them, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You mean it?" Thyrick nodded, their expression earnest. "I will stay, as long as you'll have me." Erin's lips curved into a smile, her heart swelling with a joy she hadn't felt in years. "Then stay," she said, her voice firm. "Stay with me." Thyrick smiled, their eyes glowing brighter than ever. "Always," they said, their voice a promise. As the fire crackled softly in the background, they held each other, their bond stronger than ever. For the first time, Erin felt that the future, uncertain as it was, held something beautiful, a love that had crossed worlds and defied the odds. And as they sat together, the luminous light of the lumenroot reflecting in Thyrick's eyes, Erin realized that their story was only just beginning. Months passed, and the once flickering glow within Thyrick stabilized, growing steadier with each day. Erin's remedies, paired with the resilient strength of Thyrick's will, had brought them to a place neither could have imagined. Their days together were filled with simple joys, tending the garden, sharing meals, and exploring the forest. Despite the peace they had found, a question lingered in the back of Erin's mind, a quiet fear she had not dared to voice. Thyrick could survive on Earth now, but what if their world called them back? One evening, under a sky ablaze with stars, Thyrick broke the silence. They stood by the edge of the clearing, looking up at the constellations. Erin joined them, her hand slipping into theirs. "You're thinking again," she said softly. Thyrick turned to her, their violet eyes shimmering. "I am," they admitted. "About your home?" They nodded. "Yes. My people. They may not know I am alive. They might believe I perished in the crash." Erin's chest tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Do you want to go back?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Thyrick looked at her, their gaze steady. "I want them to know I am safe," they said. "But I do not want to leave you." Relief flooded Erin, though the fear lingered. "Then what do we do?" she asked. Thyrick smiled faintly, their fingers brushing her cheek. "We go together," they said simply. Her breath caught. "Together?" "Yes," Thyrick said, their voice firm. "My world is far, but my craft can take us there. You would be welcomed, an honored guest." They paused, their expression softening. "But only if you wish to go." Erin's heart raced. The thought of leaving everything she had ever known was daunting, but the idea of staying behind without Thyrick was unbearable. "I'll go," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling within her. "Wherever you go, I'll follow." Thyrick's smile widened, their eyes glowing with joy. "You are my light," they murmured, their forehead resting against hers. "And I will never let you feel alone again." The next few weeks were a blur of preparation. Thyrick worked tirelessly to repair their craft, with Erin assisting where she could. When the day finally came, they stood together in the clearing, the craft gleaming in the sunlight. Erin looked back at the cabin one last time, her heart heavy with nostalgia. This had been her sanctuary, the place where she had found herself, and found Thyrick. "Are you ready?" Thyrick asked, their voice gentle. She turned to them, her gaze unwavering. "I am," she said. They ascended the ramp together, their hands intertwined. Inside, the craft hummed with a quiet energy, the controls glowing faintly under Thyrick's touch. As the engines roared to life, Erin felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The ground beneath them fell away, the forest growing smaller and smaller until it was just a speck in the distance. Thyrick glanced at her, their expression filled with pride and affection. "You are brave, Erin," they said. "And you are my reason," she replied, her voice steady. The journey through the stars was unlike anything Erin had ever imagined. Nebulas of vibrant colors stretched across the void, and distant planets glimmered like jewels. Thyrick pointed out constellations, their voice filled with stories of their people and culture. When they finally arrived, Erin's breath caught. Thyrick's homeworld was a breathtaking tapestry of light and life, its landscapes glowing with an otherworldly beauty. As they descended, Erin felt a sense of awe and anticipation. Thyrick's people greeted them with astonishment and reverence, their glowing forms gathering around the craft. Erin stood by Thyrick's side, her hand still in theirs, as they introduced her. "She is my heart," Thyrick said, their voice ringing with pride. "And she has saved me in more ways than one." The crowd murmured, their expressions softening as they looked at Erin with gratitude and curiosity. In the months that followed, Erin found herself embraced by Thyrick's people. Though their customs and ways were different, she adapted, her love for Thyrick giving her the courage to learn and grow. Thyrick and Erin built a life together, their bond deepening with each passing day. They became a symbol of unity between their worlds, a testament to the power of love to bridge even the greatest divides. And on nights when they stood beneath the twin moons of Thyrick's world, gazing at the stars, Erin would smile, her heart full. "Do you miss Earth?" Thyrick asked her one evening, their arm wrapped around her. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But you're my home now." Thyrick pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "And you are mine," they said. Together, they watched the stars, their hearts intertwined, their love shining brighter than any light in the universe.